This is TWiT.
Uber's former CSO, their chief security officer by the name of Joe Sullivan, was found guilty at trial due to his actions following a 2016 data breach at Uber. And I'm wording this carefully because there was actually some misreporting about this in the press. It's like, you know, the implication was for reporters who are not being careful that it was that Joe was responsible for the breach. Not at all the case, right? I mean, he's a C-suite guy. Those guys don't get their hands dirty. Anyway, we'll get to that in a second. Reading from a statement made on August 20th, 2020. So as I said, 2 years ago when these charges were filed in the Northern District of California, they put out a statement about the fact that this was being done. They said the complaint describes how Sullivan played a pivotal role in responding to Federal Trade Commission, FTC, inquiries about Uber's cybersecurity. Uber had been hacked in September 2014. Okay, so that's 2 years before, a different instance. Had been hacked in September 2014, and the FTC was gathering information about that 2014 breach. The FTC demanded responses to written questions and required Uber to designate an officer to provide testimony under oath on a variety of topics. Sullivan assisted in the preparation of Uber's responses to the written questions and was designated to provide sworn testimony on a variety of issues. On November 14th, 2016, so near the end of 2016, approximately 10 days after providing his testimony to the FTC, Sullivan received an email from a hacker informing him that Uber had been breached again. Sullivan's team was able to confirm the breach within 24 hours of his receipt of the email. Rather than report the 2016 breach, Sullivan allegedly took deliberate steps to prevent, and this is allegedly because it's 2 years ago, now it's been found to be true at trial, allegedly took deliberate steps to prevent knowledge of the breach from reaching the FTC. So he tried to bury this. For example, they said, Sullivan sought to pay the hackers off by funneling the payoff through a bug bounty program. Uber paid the hackers $100,000 in Bitcoin in December of 2016, despite the fact that the hackers refused to provide their true names. In addition, Sullivan sought to have the hackers sign non-disclosure agreements. The agreements contained a false representation that the hackers did not take or store any data, when in fact they had. When an Uber employee asked Sullivan about this false promise, which was in the non-disclosure, Sullivan insisted that the language stay in the non-disclosure agreements. Moreover, after Uber personnel were able to identify two of the individuals responsible for the breach, Sullivan arranged for the hackers to sign fresh copies of the non-disclosure agreements.
Love that piece.
Don't tell anybody.
Now, don't tell anybody what happened. And, oh, by the way, now that we know who you are, we want you to actually execute the non-disclosure agreements, which will be binding under your true names.
And they gave him a bug bounty.
Yes. Yeah. We're just going to say that you found a problem, not that you actually attacked us using it.
Appalling.
Yes. So the new agreements retained the false condition that no data had been obtained. Uber's new management ultimately discovered the truth and disclosed the breach publicly and to the FTC nearly a year later in November of 2017. Since that time, Uber has responded to additional government inquiries. So all of that was proper. The criminal complaint against Sullivan alleges Sullivan deceived Uber's new management team about the 2016 breach. Specifically, Sullivan failed to provide the new management team with critical details about the breach. In August of 2017, Uber named a new chief executive officer, a new CEO. In September of 2017, Sullivan briefed Uber's new CEO about the 2016 incident by email. Sullivan asked his team to prepare a summary of the incident, but after he received their draft summary, he edited it. His edits removed details about the data that the hackers had taken and falsely stated that payment had been made only after the hackers had been identified. That wasn't the case. The two hackers, identified by Uber, were prosecuted in the Northern District of California. Both pleaded guilty on October 30th, 2019 to computer fraud conspiracy charges and now await sentencing. The criminal complaint makes clear that both hackers chose to target and successfully hack other technology companies and their users' data after Sullivan failed to bring the Uber breach to the attention of law enforcement. In other words, by not dealing with law enforcement forthrightly, the hackers who'd been identified continued to roam free to hack and damage other companies as a direct consequence of Sullivan's actions of covering all this up. So, at trial, Sullivan was found guilty of lying to authorities and obstruction of justice. Those were the charges, lying to authorities and obstruction of justice. Nothing to do directly with Uber being hacked. It's like, we know that kind of thing happens. The trial, however, was a landmark case, being the first time a chief security officer faced criminal charges, indirectly at least, relating to a security breach. Though it was only, obviously indirectly about the breach itself. Joe's big mistake was his attempt to cover up and mislead investigators and ultimately landed him, as we know now, in some very hot water. Interestingly, Joe was once a prosecutor in the same office that had charged him.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
He should have known better.
Well, I was thinking that maybe he thought he knew how to finesse the system, right?
Yeah.
Like having once worked there, he figured, hey, I know how to get around this.
OMG.
So he now faces up to 8 years in prison and up to $500,000 in fines, which will be determined at his upcoming sentencing hearing. What has never been made clear in the reporting that I've seen is why he did this. He was a C-level executive for a major corporation, Uber. Guys at that level aren't pulling wires and getting their hands dirty. They attend meetings and golf. So it was almost certainly not directly Joe's fault that somewhere in a back room, two attackers somehow crawled into Uber's network. What I wonder is whether he had a big hunk of Uber stock that he worried would collapse in value if the news of this got out. Yeah. If so, perhaps he believed that he could cover the whole thing up from the top to protect Uber's market value. In any event, I imagine he regrets that decision now.
Can't spend that stock in prison. No, you can't.
No.
If you are looking for a midweek update on the week's tech news, I got to tell you, you got to check out Tech News Weekly. See, it's all kind of built in there with the title. You get to learn about the news in tech that matters. Every Thursday, Jason Howell and I talk to the people making and breaking the tech news, get their insights and their interesting stories. It's a great show to check out, twit.tv/TNW.